Hello, I've been asked to take part in the PF's virtual moot on the theme of love. Being a bit of a contrarian, I thought I'd take a slightly different angle and talk to you about what may seem to a lot of people a very un-pagan subject, namely the 7 deadly sins. It's something that obviously most of us associate heavily with Catholicism, particularly in the more sort of blood and thunder forms of Catholicism. But the concept of there being a set, whether it's 7 or 5 or 8 or whatever number, of undesirable behaviours, of states of mind that will weigh down spirituality, weigh down the soul, that notion is common to an awful lot of religions the world over, both ancient and more recent religions. You'll find it in Sikhism, you'll find it in Hinduism, you'll find it in the writings of the ancient Greeks and the Romans and so on. The version involving a set of 7 is something that came into common parlance in Christianity under the reign of Pope Gregory back in the 6th century, where he formalised ideas that had been knocking around for a period of time before then. At one stage it was popular to talk in terms of 8 deadly sins, for example, within Christianity, but eventually Pope Gregory formalised it as the 7 that we're fairly familiar with nowadays, merging some together and adding ideas in. From a Christian point of view, a sin, particularly if we're thinking in terms of the 7 deadly ones, is something that you value more than you value God. So, for example, if we take something like pride, I hope you enjoy the high-tech visual aids, which in Latin is superbia. Pride is the love of self, vanity, self-absorption, putting yourself as more important than, from a Christian point of view, than God. So, whatever the teachings of the Bible, that's for another day, because you're too busy staring in the mirror, admiring your own beauty, spending fortunes on clothing and hairstyles and plastic surgery and one thing and another, and not doing the things that you're meant to be doing. Or if you take another example, say greed, avaritia, in the Latin, is the worship of money and material possessions as far more important than devotion to God. It's having that flash car, the 16-bedroom mansion, the latest designer label clothing and all of the rest of it. That takes pride of precedence above all other things. It's an interesting idea, and it does have an application within paganism, the various different forms of pagan religion. You could say that whilst we don't talk as frequently in terms of love as, say, Christians or Muslims do, or Buddhists and so on, nonetheless there is that sense of wanting to value other human beings, wanting to value animal life upon the planet, wanting to value plant life, wanting to value the planet in the most broadest sense of a form of love, of spiritual love. And I think a lot of, if we got a room full of pagans and said, what would you regard as wicked, terrible behaviour in the modern day, they might not use the word sin, but they'd perhaps certainly think in terms of horrible things to avoid doing. Then probably they would be putting things like environmental destruction and sort of indifference and callousness and leaving a wake of devastation behind you, rather than truly loving and valuing the earth that we walk upon. So if you rephrase it slightly, I think that's something that would take on a degree of significance to an awful lot of pagans. And no doubt if you spoke to heathens, you get one set of ideas, and you spoke to druids another set, and cometics another set again. Probably with quite a few common themes, I dare say, cropping up. There are some concepts, however, where I think the Christian approach is decidedly different from an ancient pagan approach, and to an extent a modern pagan approach, although I think a lot of modern paganism has absorbed Christian values without realising it necessarily, and done so in a slightly uncritical way, because it's not always aware that it's doing it. So to give you I suppose a fairly obvious example, lust. Luxuria from the Latin. If we're thinking in terms of lust, it's easy to think that from a Christian point of view you're putting sexual passion before duty to God. So within the Bible it says you shouldn't commit adultery, but you've fallen madly in lust with that married person who lives next door, and you're going to cheat with them, and your wish to possess them, to have it away with them, becomes more important than your commitment to deity and the rules set in place by deity. From a modern perspective, and this is something that the occasional rather more hardline Christian columnist in various newspapers and magazines rants and raves about, sexuality becomes, or has the potential, shall we say, to become a vehicle for finding self-love. And I don't mean that in the sense of just having a wank, but if you're gay, if you're bisexual, if you are elderly, if you are overweight, if you are disabled in some way, we live in a culture which tends historically, and still to a large extent in the current day, to desexualize people in those sorts of categories. If you're young and fit and pretty and straight and all the rest of it, you can be as sexual as you like. But if you're in those other categories, either it's immoral and wicked, as so many religions claim homosexuality is, or you're too old for that, or you're too fat, or you're too this, or you're too that, and you're seen as a lesser being. So that having your sexuality removed or concealed or oppressed becomes a way of devaluing you as a person. If you are devalued as a person, it's hard to feel that connection of spiritual love, either with deity or with your own soul or with the world around you in terms of other living beings. The more worthless you feel, the more cut off you tend to feel in terms of those connections. So for a lot of people, it's not lust in the sense of running around shagging everything that moves indiscriminately, but finding value in sexuality is a route to finding spiritual awareness, is a route to finding a connection to your own soul, of finding love of your inner self. And if we think in terms of those deities, those gods and goddesses and what have you, who are very much present in sexuality, in love, we think Aphrodite, we think Pan and so on. Connecting with those deities is a way of connecting with those sexual energies. For a lot of early Christian and many modern Christian theologians, deity is a very abstract presence. Maybe one significant difference is that for an awful lot of early pagan theologians and in quite a few modern day pagan theologians, deity is not so personalised in a humdrum way, but is present in the real world, rather than just some kind of abstract world of airy-fairy ideals. Deity is present in the trees, in the deer, in the fish swimming in the river, in our bodies, in the sun, in the moon, in the passions that course through us, love and hope and desire and fear and hate, both positive and negative emotions, which is an interesting area I'll come to. I mean, if we think, for example, momentarily of wrath, of ira, from which we get the modern word irate. Yes, within Judaism, within Christianity, within Islam, there's this, God can be wrathful and angry and smite people left, right and centre. But there is a discouragement from people themselves being angry. It's maybe something that, well, it's okay for a righteous deity to get wrathful, but we should try to be calm, we should try to be peaceful, we should try to let go of anger, we should try to have a sense of detachment, an idea common in Buddhism, central in Buddhism really. Within paganism, we have deities like the Morrigan, like Mars, deities very much associated with fury, with wildness, with passion, and it's not just in the sense of they're a god or a goddess, that they can have that, but I shouldn't aspire to it. They are present in us when we feel those emotions, they flood through us. It's like the Greek concept of the daimones, which flow through and possess intense emotions. When the daimones they come to you, you are overwhelmed with a sense of love or hope or hysteria or passion or whatever it might be. So when eros is present, that sense of lust, it becomes wild, becomes all-consuming. And people sometimes are consumed by it. They do mad, crazy things which destroy their lives. Greek myth is full of people doing mad, crazy things possessed by lust, which get all a bit icky and unpleasant and maybe are not entirely suitable for conversation at the moment. So these are not necessarily, I'm arguing that these are not necessarily positive things per se. Taken too far, wrath can destroy, greed can destroy, lust can destroy. But that rather than necessarily being barriers between ourselves and deity, they become means of finding deity. They become means of finding our own inner deity as well. That divine spark, that the genius or the juno that the Romans spoke about, that inner spirit, that inner soul, which is a little god or a little goddess from their own point of view, which grows and grows and grows as we become spiritually more mature and more aware, and which persists after death. There are forces that move within us which, even those which could destroy us, which we are told are unpleasant. You mustn't show anger, you mustn't show lust, you mustn't show gluttony, you mustn't show envy. You've got to rein all of these things in. Whilst there's a time and a place for everything, it is understanding that there is a time and a place for everything, including those supposedly destructive emotions, that they are only destructive if they are out of place, out of scale. If they're allowed a natural expression, so they're not bottled up and repressed, and we don't sit there chanting away with a beatific smile on our face, trying to let go of anger and let go of this and let go of that and let go of everything else. Rather, we embrace them and we find a place for that in our life. So it becomes healthy rather than destructive of us. Then that increases the capacity to accept yourself, to love yourself. And that in itself becomes a gateway to also connecting with others. Now, I'm not going to argue that people with low self-esteem are incapable of loving others, because that's just crap. You can not love yourself very much at all and still feel great love and devotion to another human being, to your dog, to your cat, to the tree at the bottom of the garden or whatever else. But whilst you are corroded by self-hatred, it destroys your capacity to articulate your love constructively for other people. Because you're so busy ripping yourself apart, there's less and less of you to give and share with other people. So those with a more positive sense of self-esteem, an acceptance of themselves, of their own, let's say, their own appetites, their own wish to consume, of their own desire for nice material possessions, and so forth, in a balanced way, in a harmonious way. Their capacity to love others more fully, because they're not spending all of their energies ripping lumps off themselves, they are freed up to then do helpful things for other people, do useful things for other people, far more so than when they're sitting there ripping themselves to shreds. So my suggestion is that yes, there are states of mind which are very, very unhealthy and, if out of place, out of kilter, could ruin a life. But there are also ways of finding somewhere for them to sit in a more constructive way and understanding where those urges come from, how they can be balanced. Take something fairly extreme like cruelty, the wish to hurt and to take pleasure in hurting. It's very difficult to think off the top of our heads where that has a positive role, but if we step back a little and think that we are evolved over thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years as a hunting species as well as a gathering species, for the vast majority of our history we've had to eat pretty much anything we could find to eat because starvation was always loitering just a few steps away. No species can hunt unless it can enjoy the experience of hunting, of chasing after that antelope or deer or rabbit or whatever it might be, and killing it. If we were a very, very sensitive species, and every time we did that we saw the fear in the eyes of the thing we're chasing after, and it made us feel physically ill and we stopped and threw up and the creature escaped, we'd starve to death. We wouldn't be here now. Our ancestors would have died off long, long, long ago, and not lived long enough to father and mother a whole new generation that led to us. There has to be a part of the hunter's mind that enjoys the thrill of the chase, that wants to sink in their teeth, or in our case, spear, an arrow, whatever it might be, into the creature it's hunting. Even if moments later, after the kill is complete and you see the dead deer or the dead antelope, you feel a sense of shock as you sort of come back out of the hunting state of mind and think, oh, what have I done? And you feel a sense of sadness, and people often do. Nonetheless, there has to be that capacity there. And there are numerous gods and goddesses of the hunt. Artemis, for example, Diana, Gwyn ap Neith. It's embracing those deities and that part of ourself which has a capacity to enjoy the chase, enjoy the kill, enjoy the panic in the face of the thing that we're chasing, and that to egg us on to want to take it down the more quickly, the more rapidly. In its place, it has a positive expression and a potential for positive expression if it's allowed a place. If it runs out of control, you end up with monstrous sadists and people who torment and torture and abuse and do the most horrific, appalling things. So it's finding a place for everything. And that can be a challenge, particularly with some aspects of human existence. Let's face it, I mean, shell suits, what place is there for them? But it's finding somewhere for everything. As a Portuguese poet, Fernando Pessoa, said, in every corner of my soul is an altar to a different god. Every aspect of us is, in potential, an altar to a different deity. So these states, these sins and so on, as they're categorized in a lot of other religions, are, yes, potential blocks to connecting with deity when they're out of kilter, but when they're in place, they can become roots to deity. And it's almost going back to that sort of Greek idea of Aristotle that you can have a quality which in harmony enhances your existence and the existence of the people around you, because it has the domino effect rippling out. When it's lacking, or when it's in excess, then it becomes destructive, either through too little or too much. It's finding that golden mean of just right. What other religions describe as sin could be thought of as too little or too much or something. And what maybe we as pagans need to give more thought to is finding the golden mean version of those traits, what is just right. So no one factor comes to dominate your existence. We are not dominated by our sexuality, we're not dominated by our appetite for food, we're not dominated by our curiosity for intellectual pursuits. These are all corners of our soul, each with its own altar where we can spend time giving honour, giving reverence, giving due, but nothing comes to overwhelm us. And, by implication, if one thing overwhelms you, other things will be neglected and will go into decline. So you'll then have the problem that you've got far too much of this thing and nowhere near enough of those things. And that in itself is destructive and problematic. And I will very quickly finish by mentioning another Greek myth, one of my ones I quite like. I won't tell it to you because it's quite a long myth. But it's the story of a prince called Hippolytus. And Hippolytus is a very, very austere young man who is obsessed with hunting. So he's the ancient Greek version of one of these hunting, shooting, fishing, upper-class twit types who's always running around blasting things out of the sky. Hippolytus is so devoted to Artemis, goddess of the hunt, to excess that he totally neglects to give any offering or respect or due to Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Not only does he not pour out libations on her altar, light incense, make sacrifices in that manner, but he doesn't acknowledge her existence in his day-to-day life. So he's celibate. He disavows all sexuality completely. He doesn't want anything to do with women. He doesn't want anything to do with men. He doesn't want anything to do with anyone. It's hunting, hunting, hunting. And Aphrodite gets severely annoyed at this. And eventually she decides if he will not allow her due place in his life, she will storm into his life like a thundering train of a dozen horses and cause mayhem left, right and centre. So she causes his stepmother to fall obsessively and insanely in love with him. And this becomes the sort of first act in a whole series of disasters that result in a Greek tragedy, and by the end of it, just as in every Greek tragedy, the stage is littered with corpses as everyone dies left, right and centre, and indeed Hippolytus himself eventually comes a cropper because he would not give due presents. Now, I'm not arguing that there's something wrong with being celibate. If you're going through a period in your life when you're not interested, fine. But to find a way of acknowledging every quality of our own lives, even if we don't want to take them to a more pronounced level. But we should at least allow it a presence, a value, a respect. Not too much, not too little, to find the balanced way which enables us to grow in a sense of self-love, self-respect, self-regard, and become not self-obsessed, walking around with our heads shoved up our own arses, but become people who are then useful to the wider world, who are able to articulate our love for the other humans, the other creatures, the plants, the rocks, the planet, the rivers and so forth, in ways that are positive and useful and constructive to the beings around us. And I think that's probably quite enough waffle for one day. Thank you.